Tonight, at the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, testimonies on facing violence in the community.
Mr. Brake, as a journalist reporting on the story, accompanied them onto the site.
A now APTN reporter followed the story at Muskrat Falls and is now facing charges.
They're going to see, Indigenous peoples in modern-day context, but also responding and respecting the traditions and where they come from.
And First Nations take their place in preparation for the Skookum Music Festival. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. Today, Survivors of Violence was the theme of the National Inquiry's fourth day in Montreal. It's the first time that a former First Nation chief has testified about the violence she faced in her community. Danielle Rochette reports.
APTN National was first elected chief of Kitsisakik in 2009, a community that faces many challenges, like no electricity or running water for its 500 members.
I know that when I became a chief was to help my community overcome the misery that they were living in.
But things were more challenging for her as chief. She didn't have the full support from her band council.
It's an inequality between men and women. We are very far, from accepting that a woman can lead a community.
Anishinaabe felt intimidated and bullied. Her sense of security was gone. She felt threatened, all taking a toll on her mental health.
They filed a complaint just to attack me. They have bullied me. I have paid dearly for that, my mental health.
She worried for her children. She thinks they are also paying a price in connection to the bullying she experienced.
My two boys have decided they just want jobs, but they can't find jobs. They are paying the price for the fact that I was on the council. My kids are paying dearly.
Anishinaabe say it's time for a community to open their eyes to the issues she's faced.
We have to remember that the violence isn't from the outside coming into the community. It's inside the community, and we have to do away with the violence inside our community. And that's the way it is in Kitsisakik.
Tomorrow, Murdered Indigenous Women is the theme for the National Inquiry's last day of testimony here. Danielle Rochette, APTN National News, Montreal.
Thursday afternoon, the National Inquiry heard from an Atikamekw speaking circle. The discussion revolved around a suspicious car accident that led to the death of 5 community members from Manawa First Nation. Family members of the 4 young adults and 1 teenager who died described how the death of their loved ones still hangs heavy 40 years later. They drowned when the van they were in skidded into a river. Their deaths are considered suspicious because 2 non-Indigenous men in the car survived. The families testified that the incident was not adequately investigated.
The elders tried to find out, but they were already in their caskets. The elders said they cannot have drowned. They were assassinated. This is very difficult to think about, because we know that there was not an adequate investigation.
The Manitoba government says it will not be holding a public inquiry into the death of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine. Last month, Raymond Cormier was acquitted of second-degree murder in Fontaine's death. The chief of Saging First Nation, Fontaine's home community, is calling on the government to hold an inquiry. Today, in the Manitoba legislature, MLA Nahani Fontaine, also of Saging, made a plea to the Justice Minister.
Certainly the Children's Advocate Office will conduct a review, but not at the same level of resources, transparency, or the ability to call witnesses, and with no assurances that the report will be released. Manitoba has a responsibility to find out in the most comprehensive manner how one of their most vulnerable citizens fell through the cracks and lost her life in one of the most grotesque and tragic manners. Will the Justice Minister call a public inquiry on the death of Tina Fontaine today?
And our thoughts and prayers go out to Tina's family and to those in the Saugeen community. Madam Speaker, the member opposite rightly stated that Tina's death is currently the focus of a special investigation under the purview of the Office of the Children's Advocate. And because of changes that the Minister of Families recently made, Madam Speaker, that the results of that report will be released to the public. We need to allow that process to take place, Madam Speaker. We will await the results of that process.
Time for an update on a case we reported on in February 2017. That's when the RCMP laid criminal charges against a journalist who covered protests at the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric site in Labrador. Justin Brake followed Innu and Inuit protesters past the gates at Muskrat Falls in October 2016 and reported from inside the occupation. Brake was among 28 people charged. APTN was granted intervenor status in the case to make arguments about the significance of journalism as it relates to recovering Indigenous issues. Justin Brake was hired by APTN in October 2017. This week, a provincial court judge ruled the criminal charges against him will proceed. For more on this case, Jeff Budden, Brake's lawyer, joins us from St. John's, Newfoundland. Thanks for joining us today, Jeff. The criminal charges were laid just over a year ago. Can you explain the charges and what has happened with this case since they were laid?
As you probably know, there was an injunction made in Labrador in October of 2016, and certain people, despite the injunction, entered onto the Muskrat Falls property. Mr. Brake, as a journalist reporting on the story, accompanied them onto the site. There was a civil contempt charge laid in November of 2016, and in March of 2017 the criminal charges were laid for violating a court order and also for mischief relating to, apparently, to economic loss suffered by the developer because of the occupation.
Can you explain the differences between the criminal charges Justin Brake is facing and the civil contempt proceedings in the Newfoundland and Labrador Supreme Court, and does one have any impact on the other?
The civil charge was initiated by Nalcor, and we as his lawyers brought an application to court last spring asking that it be vacated because Nalcor did not advise the judge who issued the contempt arrest warrant that Mr. Brake was a journalist. That application was dismissed and has now moved on to the Court of Appeal, where we are waiting on a decision. The criminal matter is, of course, laid under the Criminal Code of Canada, and those allegations are also proceeding to trial on a parallel but entirely different track.
So what are the next steps in this case?
In the civil matter, as I just said, we are waiting on the Court of Appeal to give its decision, which we hope to receive in the not too distant future. The criminal matter, we had an application to court on a procedural point that was decided earlier this week. There may well be, probably will be, other procedural applications that have to take place. The trial is certainly quite a ways down the road on those charges.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We'll certainly be following this case as it proceeds. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Yesterday, we brought you part one of a look into a First Nation in Alberta who is opposing a proposed oil project they say would pose a threat to their hunting grounds. We'll have the second part of this story coming up after the break.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamaran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. we talked to an opponent of Kinder Morgan's proposed pipeline expansion in British Columbia about a unique barrier to possible construction. Also, the federal government announced they'll be negotiating a settlement of victims of student-on-student abuse in residential schools. A Dalhousie professor talks about whether or not this was common. And the issue of too many Indigenous women behind bars got raised in New York this morning. I'll have all that after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Cloudy and +3 in St. John's and Charlottetown, +1 in Halifax, -1 in Nain, cloudy and 2 above in Happy Valley Goose Bay, sun and -3 in Montreal, -9 in Val d'Or, sunny skies in Ontario, -3 in Peterborough and London, +2 in Windsor, 5 below in Timmins, a mild +3 in Thunder Bay. In northern Manitoba, a chilly -22 in Churchill, 0 in Flin Flon and the Pas, +1 in Barons River and Gimli Harbour, +3 in Dauphin. In Saskatchewan, -2 in Estevan and Regina, +2 in Buffalo Narrows and Uranium City. Welcome back. The Auditor General of Canada visited Iqaluit to report on the territory's progress in preparing for climate change. They got a failing grade. But as Kent Driscoll explains, this year's report and the Nunavut government's response sound very familiar.
The Auditor General of Canada does audits on the territories. They act in place of a provincial Auditor General. This is the most recent audit. Nunavut is ready for climate change.
The impacts of climate change are visible across Nunavut. We found that the government of Nunavut was not adequately prepared to respond to these impacts.
The answer, Nunavut is not ready. Why not? The government of Nunavut put a plan in place back in 2014.
Human resource capacity challenges within the government, and those make it difficult to sustain effort and attention.
Many of the positions are not filled in this most...
This is nothing new for Nunavut residents. In the last decade, the Auditor General has made reports on social workers, child safety, justice in jails. All of them found there were major problems.
Adequately meeting its key responsibilities for the month.
And each time, the Nunavut government agreed and promised to make changes. But those changes don't happen. This year's audit did identify one of the reasons that there is such little movement. There aren't enough people to get things done. 27% of Government of Nunavut jobs are currently not filled, left vacant. This year, the Auditor General also did suggest a way to get out of the understaffing cycle. Pick fewer things and do them correctly.
But it's incumbent that the government not try and do everything, but to really focus in on, okay, what are in the short term, what can we address?
Every time the Auditor General visits Iqaluit, they find serious faults and make recommendations. But that means little when there aren't enough people to do the work. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Yesterday, APTN's Chris Stewart brought us the story about the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation and their search for woodland buffalo. They're worried a proposed new open-pit oil mine, which would be built on their traditional hunting grounds, would threaten the buffalo. Today, we continue on the search for the buffalo and find out what impact the mine would have on their way of life.
Morning, dudes. The day begins. Lisa Tazazi and Roy Lattiser from the Athabascan Chippewan First Nation. We set off to find the woodland buffalo. The buffalo's numbers have been decimated in recent years by foreign hunters. We hope to see if they are in good numbers and look healthy. Our guide, Roy, warns us on the way that it is a long ride by skidoo.
You will cross lakes, but you will cross prairies and creek beds and beaver dams. And that's where the buffalo roam in the winter months.
The buffalo here are now protected from hunting, but there is a new threat. Oil. Teck is Canada's largest mining company. They want to open a large open-pit oil extraction site called Frontier, right on the buffalo's roaming area. Driving for hours, we come across tracks in the snow.
These tracks right here?
Buffalo.
Buffalo track right there?
All buffalo.
Looks like an old track though.
No, these were tracks when I was cutting the road here.
These ones right here.
These were all fresh when we were cutting the road here.
More time riding, and we find more proof buffalo were here. Frozen dung. After driving in the bush for over 25 kilometers and the daylight getting shorter, we have to stop. There is a high ridge our skidoos can't pass. There is plenty of bison tracks and scat here. Our guide Roy says the buffalo are on the other side of the ridge, and we can't get to it. It's too far to walk in 3 feet deep snow. But that doesn't disappoint Lisa Tazazi.
As long as we've seen evidence that they're there, and there's seen quite a bit of evidence. Quite a bit of fresh poop. And where they were laying down and visiting.
So they're still around.
Yeah.
We begin the long ride back to camp and stop for a late lunch. We make it back to camp before dark. Roy Lattiser explains that the land Tech wants to use for the Frontier project is vital to the buffalo. He says they can't be disturbed if their numbers are to improve.
Tech lease. That's where they strive around about. That's their main corridor walk around when they do their rotational habitat summer travels. And to see young ones, fresh tracks of young ones being newborns, well, that's enough evidence to tell me that left alone, altogether, give them 4 or 5 years, they'll go right back to the numbers that they were 5 years ago.
APTN contacted Tech for a comment on this story. They sent us a statement. It said, in part, "We are committed to advancing Frontier in a manner that is respectful of Indigenous peoples and local communities, and it is environmentally and socially responsible." But Roy Lattiser says he's heard that before and doesn't believe the oil companies care about the First Nations people, the land, or the buffalo.
These animals were always there for the Dene people, the First Nations people. That was always the First Nations ground. And to see oil companies trying to overrun the treaty rights that was handed down, trying to break the law little bit by little bit is not the way it's going to happen.
The Frontier project is having final approval hearings this spring. Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation will be there to contest it. The $20 billion project could have regulatory approval later this year, with construction to begin in 2019. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Poplar Point, Alberta.
It was a verdict that sent shockwaves across Turtle Island. Gerald Stanley found not guilty of killing 22-year-old Cree youth Colton Bushy. Rob Smith takes a deep dive into how it happened. Here's a preview of Justice for Colton.
I felt defeated. Then I said, what a bunch of assholes. This ain't over yet. I'm going to keep coming and I ain't going to stop until that asshole's put away.
Colton Bushy was shot point blank in the back of his head. The 22-year-old Cree youth died instantly. The man who shot him, Saskatchewan farmer Gerald Stanley. In this era of reconciliation, the verdict, not guilty, deepened racial divides across the country.
But we live in a society where we are treated differently and looked at differently.
For most Indigenous people, they felt they had just witnessed a colonial, white supremacist system at work. This is a place race collides violently. Court was held in the same town. 8 Cree men were hanged in 1885 for rebelling against the Crown. In fact, it's been labeled the Mississippi of the North.
The Mississippi of Canada hasn't changed. You're not going to be embarrassed of something that gives you tremendous privilege.
You can see the entire episode tomorrow on APTN Investigates. Time now for another quick break, but stick around. We've got the latest on a new music festival hitting the scene in Vancouver. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, +4 in High Level, Peace River, and Fort McMurray, +3 in Calgary and Medicine Hat, snow and +2 in Lethbridge. Over on the west coast, cloudy skies, +10 in Victoria, Vancouver, Campbell River, and Bella Coola, sun and 9 above in Prince Rupert, +6 in Dease Lake and Fort Nelson. In Yukon, sun and +5 in Whitehorse, -8 in Rock River. Over to NWT, the sun continues, +2 in Trout Lake and Fort Simpson, +1 in Wrigley, 9 below in Fort McPherson, a chilly -20 in Sax Harbor. In Nunavut, -29 in Whale Cove and Chesterfield, sun and -32 in Clyde River, -33 in Resolute. A major music festival featuring music, arts, and culture has just been announced in Vancouver. As APTN's Tina House reports, it's the first of its kind to partner with First Nations in a big way.
The Skookum Music Festival was announced at this media event in Vancouver and will take place here in Vancouver's iconic Stanley Park.
Obviously, the location is a massive opportunity in our eyes, in the sense of it opens up the potential for what we keep calling the non-traditional festival audience, and that's people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s that love music, love the experience of seeing live music together, but can't get their heads around the notion of being in a campground for 3 days.
And the lineup features some of Canada's biggest names.
The Killers, Florence and the Machine, Metric, Arkells, The War on Drugs, St. Vincent, Father John Misty, Blue Rodeo.
According to the festival director Paul Runnels, 30% of the festival will be dedicated to featuring Indigenous performers, art, and culture. Dustin Rivers was there to represent the 3 host First Nations.
Really excited about this festival and the work that we've been doing with Skookum and the team, and really grateful that our nations have been invited to be a part of this process, to give advice, to help steer some of the content and help be a part of this process to make it successful, so that our nations are really making this a unique opportunity.
And some of the Indigenous performers will include Crystal Shawanda, Buffy St. Marie, Kelly Derrickson, Murray Porter, Snotty Nose Rez Kids, and Takaya Blaney, just to name a few. Tawani Joseph and his band Bitterly Divine will also be performing during the 3-day festival.
You will see people from around the world coming to this festival and across the country, and they're going to see, Indigenous peoples in modern-day context, but also responding and respecting the traditions from where they come from and the stories that we have.
The Skookum Music Festival takes place September 7th to 9th in beautiful Stanley Park. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Looks like it's going to be a good festival. That's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Nation to Nation with Todd Lamarand is up next. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.